Hi, welcome to Tim's Take. This is Tim Reinbott. I'm the Director of Field Operations and Communications, as well as the Assistant Director of Natural Resources at the University of Missouri. Well, welcome to this section of Tim's Take, and today we're continuing with our conversation with Andrew Kientzy. He is the Senior Research Analyst of the Extension Agricultural Business and Policy at the University of Missouri. And we're talking now about crop production budgets, and not quite as rosy as our livestock, but you have them for corn, soybeans, wheat, and everything, and even different parts of the state.
Yep, we do. We've got two different sets of crop budgets. We've got our what we call our Missouri crop budgets represent basically anywhere from draw an arc around the Mississippi Delta there in the southeast corner. Basically, that's what the Missouri crop budgets cover. Is basically our typical, mostly non-irrigated, non laser leveled type of crop ground across the state. We do have special crop budgets for the southeast corner of Missouri that is better set up for furrow irrigation. We're also raising cotton, rice, peanuts, those kinds of crops they have down there that the rest of the state doesn't have the opportunity to grow. So we do have those two different sets for each different geographic region.
Do you differentiate between furrow irrigation and lateral irrigation?
In the Southeast Missouri budgets, there's a pick list in there to where folks can select whether they're running furrow irrigators or pivots or lateral, whatever you want to do. There is that selection there where you can select your irrigation type, and it automatically pulls in an estimation of the cost difference between each of those systems. Sure.
And you have also double crop soybeans too.
Yes.
But is that statewide?
Yes, so we got double crops for both the whole of Missouri region and the Southeast region.
Okay. And just like in our livestock, you include all the expenses that we have.
Do our best to, yes.
Yeah, and often they're not looking too good right now.
No, there's been better, that's for sure.
But also with these tough times, can producers look at these and say, okay, now where can I try to save some dollars at? Where am I really spending the most at?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest strengths of the budgets, Tim, is being able to kind of take that look. And again, for our standard picture is kind of trying to take a high level approach to what a typical cropping system across the state might look like. We try to kind of pick an average as far as what yield potential is, pick an average as far as what folks are probably putting down for seed, and pick an average for what fertilizer rates are, just to name a few. But again, those customizable spreadsheets that we have, you can go in and change your seeding rate, change all of that, and put those side by side and see, well, the state average is we might be putting on 170 units of nitrogen. Here I'm in a little bit, not quite the same yield environment. Maybe I'm budgeting for 150 bushel an acre corn, so I'm only going to put on 135 units of nitrogen and see where that cost saving comes in. Additionally, you can kind of use it the same other way and say, well, I'm in a similar yield environment, but I'm spending twice as much or time and a half as much on my pest control, and say, well, maybe I need to be looking at ways to find some generic products, cut back an application or two to see where I can find some savings, because it looks like the state as a whole isn't necessarily having quite that investment into that specific input.
Equipment costs can be a huge impact on this. And I know several years ago, a lot of folks went to more leasing, but off air you were saying that's kind of pulled back.
I think it depends on where you're at and which dealers we're working with. You're definitely not hearing as much about competitive lease offers as we were a few years ago. The machinery market has kind of been feeling some of the crop prices like we've been having right now, especially on some of our kind of late model, larger equipment. You can go to pretty well any consignment auction across the state, and you can find 5-year-old or less Class 8 combine, for example, that might have had a hammer price of $250,000 or even maybe a little bit less, $225,000, whereas you'd see a similar machine sitting on a dealer lot and they're asking $400,000 for it. So I think there's definitely quite a bit of disparity out there in terms of where the equipment market actually is right now. And there probably are some, if you're set up to, take a chance on some of that bigger machinery, maybe it's a step larger than what a small to mid-sized operation is looking for. But the folks who are buying new aren't necessarily looking for that large piece of used machinery either. There can be some reasonable deals had on that type of equipment.
Looking back at your expenses, and I said, well, soybeans has a fertilized budget. I don't fertilize my soybeans, but we are still. You gotta remember, you're still taking fertilizer away. You may over fertilize your corn,
sure thing,
but you gotta remember that.
Yeah, that's kind of what we, for the most part, across all of our budgets, we're just planning for on our phosphorus and potassium. We're basically planning for a removal rate. We're not trying to throw a bunch into the budget like we're trying to build up some ground we just bought that was a little bit testing lower than where we wanted it. Pretty well across the budgets, the removal rate. So whether or not you're putting that fertilizer on our beans, or whether you're applying extra to your corn and just using the residual for beans, a 50 bushel bean crop is going to take off what a 50 bushel bean crop takes off.
Somebody's you're gonna pay for it sometime,
right?
And so you might as well is included. You could also use some of this whether to buy those traits or not. Couldn't you? You could say, well, if I don't buy all the herbicide traits, it's gonna cost me more or less on this end.
Sure.
So you can help make some of those decisions.
Yep, absolutely, and that's one thing we haven't necessarily dove into yet is specifically differentiating out a conventional crop budget where we're not using GMO seed and we're using some more cultural weed control methods, for example, but. That's certainly something with the flexibility in the budget spreadsheet someone could do is they could adjust their seed costs. They could adjust their herbicide costs. If they even were interested in that, they could put a row cultivation pass for some mechanical weed control in their machinery costs with our budgets and be looking at it that way too. So you could really take our, standard GMO corn budget where we're using synthetics and everything on herbicide, pesticide, and insecticide and fungicide, and you could transition that into a full organic budget if you wanted to.
Speaking of organic, do you do any budgets for those?
We have dabbled in it a little bit for specific projects, but we've never had a kind of a broad spectrum organic budget. And I think a lot of the reason behind that is it's a pretty variable industry. I think organic, there's a lot more freedom of innovation. There's a lot of folks that are trying really unique stuff, whether that be anywhere from I'm gonna moldboard plow in the spring to kind of try to bury some of that seed bank, and then I'm gonna be row cultivating 3 to 4 times. Or there's also the folks that come at it with the approach that I'm gonna cover crop it, I'm gonna roller crimp it, and then I'm gonna no-till and do my best to keep it weed free just based on what that is. So there's just so much variability in the organic space, and also on the market side too, where so much of that production is contract based, and the contracts vary from buyer to buyer. So it's just tough to make a one-size-fits-all budget for that. But if that's something that someone has a need for, they can definitely reach out, and certainly something we can help them with.
We've talked about tillage and also cover crops and such, and the land value. By doing some of these things like no tilling and cover crops, you may actually preserve your land value or even improve it, correct?
You could, absolutely.
And is this reflected in any of this? Or
you can certainly make it reflective. So kind of for a standard one-size-fits-all in our budgets, we're basically for our land costs, we're just saying it's a cash rent equivalency is what we're using for our land costs. And on most of our budgets this year, that's $185 an acre is kind of the statewide average number we're using. Now, you could certainly say, if you're in a cash rent scenario and maybe you've got a deal with a landlord where they'd really prefer to see you using some cover crops, and maybe that's something that they're assigning a value to, and say, well, I'd be willing to give you a $10 an acre credit on your rental rate because you're doing some of these conservation practices and helping me preserve my asset in the land. Certainly, changing your land costs in the budget to reflect things like that is something we can do.
How about like federal programs like EQIP? Do you have budgets for those that you can? Well, if you have that 30-foot strip, this will return to that versus farming that 30-foot strip.
Sure, that we don't have anything specifically that breaks it out that way, Tim. But again, there's definitely I worked with was doing some work as far as native grasses just a few weeks ago. And was doing a Zoom with Department of Conservation on the economics of native grasses for forage. And the guy that came on after me, he was talking about some work they were doing down in Mississippi with buffer strips. And I was actually asking him about what their methodology was and how we could kind of translate that to Missouri. So that's not something I've dove into yet, but it is something that I'm interested in, and we might be seeing something like that come out in the future.
Well, or you could, they have yield maps, and along that 30 foot, my yields drop about 25% because of
if not more.
Yeah, exactly. I was being
I can
generous.
think of, I got plenty in my own fields so looking around the edge. So yeah, you got that first 12 rows on the outside where it might be 50.
Right. So you could punch those yield numbers into your budget.
Absolutely.
First, and get a number, and then look at your federal program. Well, I'm guaranteed $100 an acre.
Sure.
Profit. Well, I guess you didn't, but then you got to do your other costs of that too. The cost of ownership of that land.
The way I kind of even look at that, Tim, is anytime that we have our operating costs as far as what we're putting into it in terms of seed, fertilizer, chemical, fuel, labor, if that exceeds the money we're getting back out of it, we would be better off to not plant that whatsoever. So on a lot of cases, while those programs can help out, if we're talking about 75% of crop yield reduction, then we might be better off just to plant that to a buffer strip, whether we have that program or not, just because it's costing us so much more to plant those acres and we're getting back off of it. So while those programs can help, a lot of times it can be economically justifiable on its own merit too.
Because I think sometimes we get into wanting to plant every acre that we can, because we're trying to cover our equipment expense and what have you, our fixed costs, but we wind up losing money that way.
Sure. Yep. And it's absolutely true that if we can have the same equipment to farm 1,500 acres and we can take that equipment up and farm 2,000 acres with it, we're going to reduce our fixed equipment costs because we're not increasing our fleet at all to cover those next 500 acres. However, if that next 500 acres is a piece that we're paying quite a bit for it in rent, or it's just real marginal ground and we can't it's not paying if it's not covering our costs, regardless of whether we're reducing our fixed machinery costs or not, it's probably not going to be worth taking that farm on if it's not profitable on its own merit.
We made a statement in the last segment about usually in Northeast Missouri, our best ground is in corn and soybeans, and our more marginal soil ground is in pastures. And when crop prices are good, you're tempted to take that out of pasture and put it in corn and soybeans because it's going to pencil out.
Right.
But now it's not.
Right.
Then you got to go back. What's it going to cost to get back into the pasture?
Right. Yeah, and that's a $1 million question, right? Because today, where we're looking at record cattle profitability in some cases, and almost historically poor in terms of our row crop profitability, there's people that are thinking about pulling ground back out of row crop production that's been out for say 20, 25 years. And in that case, well, we haven't worked on that fence at all in 20, 25 years, and maybe we dozed it out and it's just not even there anymore.
Right.
Well, fence, to fence I was doing some work earlier today, to fence an 80-acre piece, it could be $15,000 or $20,000. So that's a pretty significant investment that makes it a barrier to entry to even get back into forages on some of those more marginal tracks, or even decent tracks that we're just looking to try something different on. That's really prohibitive. And I think that's really delaying the transition of some of that marginal ground back into pasture.
Yeah, right. So, but let's say I am a diversified and I'm grazing either maybe cover crops or wheat in the fall, in the winter. That can help. They can help my cost too, couldn't it?
Sure. Yep. And that's a unique opportunity for those places where we've got the ability where we can either fence something off with some electric fence or still have some old fence around it. Is that kind of adds a second revenue stream. We are able to be able to take off some of that. Even just on say a cover crop. If you're traditionally cover cropping and say we're just gonna terminate it, well, we do have the expense in putting that out there. Our seed, the cost of running a tractor and drill or tractor and spreader over it to get that seed out there, and then we've also got the cost of terminating that if it's not something we fit into a normal program. But if we can fit that grazing or a forage harvest in there, that adds a revenue component to it that can help add that into the profitability on the rest of our enterprise and can help things look a little bit better when times are bleak otherwise.
Because you've done some economic analysis on some of my research plots with cover crops, and I would learn really quick the cost of cover crop makes a huge difference.
It does, absolutely.
You get to some of the mixes that can get expensive, and that if you don't get a subsequent yield boost, it can really hurt your bottom line. Sure
thing. Yep. And that's, one of the things with, we're talking about grazing cover crops is, a lot of times some of those diverse mixes, while they're, it's great from a conservation and wildlife standpoint, if we're talking about straight tonnage for grazing, we might be best off just to go in with, 60 or 70 pounds of cereal rye and leave it at that, where that's a pretty, can be a pretty reasonable in terms of what our total seed cost is. And it's also probably going to, might simplify our seeding and things like that, where we don't have to worry about getting that mixed up. So for sure, if we're thinking about it from an economic standpoint and a grazing standpoint, a lot of times just that straight cereal blend might be the best way to go about it.
I was talking to Eric Bailey one time, and we forget about how good our corn stalk or corn residue is in the fall as far as grazing. Mm-hmm. That the leaves and the shucks are still fairly nutritious, and throw that on top of a cereal crop, you got a pretty good grazing there.
Sure, yeah. It doesn't take much additional growth in the fall. By the time you add that little bit of green with the corn stover that's left out there, you've got a pretty good feed for a long time.
Right. One of the things that we came in my lifetime, we went less diversified. When I was first growing up in probably North Missouri 30, 40 years ago, there was a lot more diversification. Is that reflecting now in our overall farm budgets, just that consistency?
I think now we're definitely highlighting the importance of diversity, and kind of one of the downsides of getting away from that is a lot of these operations are really much more dependent on whatever their single revenue stream that they kind of specialized into is. But yeah, I think that can be, the lack of flexibility that's given to a lot of farms is probably getting us to the point where, we're not able to transfer acres on a national scale back out of corn and soybean production like we were once upon a time, where we could make that transition into forages fairly easily because we already had stock on the farm, we already had water. It was something pretty easy to do, and I think that lack of flexibility probably makes it more difficult to where now we're mostly stuck with say 180 million acres between corn and soybeans on a pretty annual basis, 170 million. It's tough that now we're in kind of a little bit of a economic turmoil on the farm. It can be tough to kind of flex that back out and use the diversification to buffer our markets a little bit.
And because the cost of entry is just so much too.
Sure.
Now, I guess we could look at some annual forages to help us get into that. Mm-hmm. Do you have any budgets on like sorghum, sedans, and millets and that sort of thing? Or
so based on we don't have that currently. It's something that we're starting to look more into, given the popularity of management intensive grazing and some of those things like that, where folks are more interested in some of the annual forages than they used to be, when they just said, pasture's cheap enough, I can go out there with my fescue yielding 2.5-3 tons an acre, and that's plenty good enough based on what I can rent more pasture for.
Sure. All right. Anything else on our cropping systems that you want to bring out?
I think overall in the cropping systems, I think one of the most important things to look at when we're talking about enterprise budgets is just how prevalent that fixed machinery cost is. Because we break that out we've got 3 different lines in the budgets for machinery operating costs. We've got our fuel cost, our operator labor cost, and then our repair cost. But basically take that number, and it's going to be basically 50% of what our total machinery cost is, and the rest of that is tied up in our fixed costs, our depreciation, our overhead costs on the storage structures, things like that, and our long-term capital repair costs when you got to put a motor in something, when you got to put a new set of tires on it, and that kind of non-annual, non-maintenance type expense, this large one-time outflows of cash, those ownership costs. And plus the interest payments as well on whether you own it outright or not. The opportunity cost of capital on a $250,000 piece of equipment at 7.25% interest is a pretty significant cost. So being able to have that outlined and kind of figure that out based on all the different field operations you're using for a crop and all the different types of equipment that you're using to put out a crop for the year can be pretty impactful to kind of see that out in front of you, rather than just having the rough idea based on not really knowing when some of those high dollar amount repairs and things like that are going to hit.
And I didn't even think about having the machinery sheds to store our equipment in. On forages, one of the arguments is that if I'm not making the hay, I let the animals do my harvest, I reduce a lot of that cost then.
It can be, but you've got to sell all your equipment, and then you've got to, whether if you got facilities for that, you kind of got to let them go, because whether or not you're using it, there's still the tires and hoses still dry rot, batteries are still going to go bad. Even if you're not using it, a lot of those ownership fixed machinery costs are still going to be there, even if we're not actually running that equipment. So if it's still on the farm, it's still costing you something.
Can we also give us a value so I could? Let's say I do go more, I'm going to try to do as much year-round grazing. I'm not going to make hay. I'm going to buy my hay. This is going to also help me decide how much that hay is worth, buying it from you to bring it to my farm.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think on the forage budgets, one of the strengths of them is it actually, rather than just saying, well, this is the hay price and that's what hay is worth, it can help you figure out what your cost in the hay is, because a lot of times, we forget that there's 50 pounds of potassium in every ton of hay fescue hay we pull off. And, a lot of times we might not necessarily be spreading that back out there, but it's costing us something, those nutrients that we're pulling back out of it. So seeing what your nutrient cost to making hay is, knowing what nutrients you're bringing back onto the farm if you're buying hay, that's definitely a valuable component to it as well.
Well, for example, I have someone bale my hay on shares. My hay is very expensive then, because I'm losing 2/3 of it. I'm losing all the fertility off of it too.
Sure. Yeah. You're trading your fertility for somebody else's machinery costs.
Right. Exactly. So you got to think of it that way too.
Yep. There's a big trade off there, depending on, what your yield is. Basically, whether if you're high yielding, you've got a relatively lower machinery cost per ton of hay. But if you're low yielding, you got high machinery costs and lower comparative fertility costs. So it's kind of a matrix. You got to figure out where you fall on that spectrum to figure out where the better deal is going to be at.
And also, even on the grain crops, where you might want somebody to custom harvest for you or custom spray, you can look at these sheets and determine that. Yeah,
you can absolutely pencil that in. Of course, the one weakness of the budgets is there's a whole lot of intangibles that we aren't able to account for. I know, one of the longest standing kind of arguments against a lot of custom hire is you don't know when they're going to get there, and you don't know what's going to happen in that time period. So there are some intangible values you can place on having your own combine, being able to harvest when the weather's fit and when you want to, that we aren't necessarily able to add some value to. So while you can compare to dollars and cents of, well, it's going to cost me this much to run my own combine, it's going to cost me this much to have somebody come in and do it for me, there's also that intangible factor that you got to decide on your own and how that reflects your operation.
Yeah, I know 20 years ago when our first GMO, soybeans and corn, or maybe it's 30 years ago now, but 20 years ago or so, a lot of farmers quit spraying their own fields because they could get custom applied so much cheaper, because we was putting on post-emergent, we're taking care of all the weeds, we didn't have to worry about it. Mm-hmm. Then when we started getting resistance, we had to do our own management, so this when we started getting our sprayers again.
Sure.
So it kind of goes in cycles.
It does, absolutely.
All right. Well, Drew, this has been really interesting, and my economics is buy high and sell low. So this really helps a lot, but really having these enterprise budgets to give you a great start, to see where you're going to be. You can use those overall just to look at, say, okay, corn right now, irrigated corn is losing $124 an acre. Now, how do I make it work?
Yep.
And that gives you those opportunities.
Yeah, I think the being able to benchmark where you're at based on a kind of a average high level perspective is definitely one of the most valuable things you can get out of these budgets.
But you got to be honest with yourself.
True. Yes.
I mean, well, my center pivots are 20 years old, they're paid for. Yeah, but you got to put replacement cost in there too.
Right. You got to have the replacement cost. And then a lot of times there's that big trade-off on machinery where if we go older, sure, we can have a lot less depreciation than the guy with the new stuff. Mm-hmm. But that's going to come at the cost that we're probably eventually, whether it comes this year, whether it comes 5 years down the road, there's going to be some additional repair costs to go along with that.
So you got to look your cost a few years down the road too.
Well, at some level, yeah. I mean, you never know when, I could say, well, I farm 600 acres and I could do that with, I got a 25-year-old combine that's worth $15,000. Mm-hmm. And it's probably going to go the next 250 hours and have no major issues. But eventually there's going to come the day to where it's going to ruin a hydraulic pump, and that's going to cost me $6,000, mm-hmm. which is, a third of what the whole machine is worth. So you've kind of got to be aware that some of those, if you're talking about older, lower value equipment, where on an annual basis you're probably going to get away running it for less, there is that risk factor to where you could have that one single high dollar expense that's going to make your cost significantly higher for that year and the next few years after that, when you kind of try to spread that out a little bit.
Or if you have the right neighbors, you could get custom done.
Sure, and then that would avoid the whole problem.
It would, yeah. So I mean, but you got to have those right.
You got to have the relationships and kind of be able to figure out what type of risk you're most comfortable with. If you're comfortable with the risk of maybe my neighbor can't get to me in time, versus am I comfortable with the risk? Well, I have my own combine, but it might break. It might have a catastrophic breakdown, and then I'm still relying on the neighbor.
Right.
So you got to weigh that risk and see what's going to work for you based on how much you're willing to spend per acre as far as being invested in machinery, and also with what level of risk I can afford, because obviously we can way over equip and have a extraordinarily high dollar value of machinery per acre that we're farming, and probably have very low risk about whether we're not going to be able to get it done or not. But that's going to come with a higher dollar amount as far as our fixed machinery costs every year. So you got to find that balance of being appropriately equipped for the job you've got to do, versus the risk of being able to get all your crop out or get your crop planted in a timely manner.
That's great. That's great. And in these tight times, we need to know all this information. We really do. Well, thanks, Drew. This has been fantastic. And this is it for Tim's Take today. We'll talk to you next time. We'll see you. Bye.